The baby had already been born when the first alarm went off. Not a siren, not a scream. Just a pause, a long, uncomfortable silence in a small conference room where no one knew what to say next. The contract lay open on the table, signed, stamped, witnessed, perfect on paper. And yet, one of the attorneys kept reading the same paragraph over and over again, his finger tracing the ink as if the words might change. They didn't. Instead, something far more unsettling settled in. The agreement everyone believed was legal might never have been real at all. It was supposed to be a routine surrogacy arrangement, the kind that happens quietly every day, guided by paperwork, trust, and medical precision. A hopeful couple, a willing surrogate, a man named Thomas Lippert, confident, articulate, and seemingly well-versed in the process. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about him. Mid-40s, calm demeanor, clean record. He spoke with certainty, the kind that makes people relax without realizing why. That confidence was the first thing investigators would later circle in red. Because confidence, they knew, can be rehearsed. The surrogate, whose name would later be sealed in court documents, remembered how normal everything felt in the beginning. The meetings were professional. The terms were clearly explained. The promises were specific: medical coverage, compensation, legal protection. Thomas Lippert handled most of the communication himself. Emails, calls, documents. He always responded quickly, always with reassurance. Whenever a question came up, he had an answer. Whenever doubt surfaced, he smoothed it over. And when the surrogate hesitated, even briefly, he reminded her that everything was by the book. That phrase would come back to haunt everyone. The pregnancy progressed without incident. Doctors confirmed the paperwork. Clinics accepted the arrangement. No red flags were raised. Which is exactly why what happened next was so disturbing. Because when the baby was born, Thomas Lippert didn't react the way investigators expected. There was no visible joy. No relief. No emotional release. Just control. He insisted on handling the next steps immediately: custody transfer, documentation, hospital discharge. He pressed for speed, not celebration. The surrogate noticed it then, a subtle shift, not panic, not fear, urgency. And urgency, in cases like this, is never random. The first unusual clue surfaced less than 48 hours later. A routine verification call was made, standard procedure, nothing more. The kind of call that rarely uncovers anything significant. Until it did. One detail didn't align. A registration number tied to the surrogacy agreement didn't match any active record. At first, it was dismissed as a clerical error. But when a second check was run, the discrepancy remained. And then a third. That's when the tone changed. Investigators from a regional family services unit were quietly notified. Not because a crime had been confirmed, but because uncertainty had entered the room. They approached the case cautiously. Surrogacy law is complex. Mistakes happen. Assumptions can ruin lives. So they began with questions, not accusations. Who drafted the agreement? Who verified the legal standing? Who ensured compliance with local statutes? Every answer led back to the same name: Thomas Lippert. When investigators requested a formal interview, Lippert didn't resist. He arrived early, dressed neatly, brought copies of everything. He spoke clearly, confidently, and without hesitation. He explained the process in detail: medical arrangements, financial terms, legal safeguards. He used the right language, the right phrases. Even corrected one investigator's terminology politely. To an untrained eye, he looked prepared. To a trained one, he looked rehearsed. There was one moment during the interview that stood out. When asked who verified the legality of the agreement, Lippert paused. Just long enough to notice. Then he smiled. He named a consultant. Provided credentials. Gave an office address. The investigator wrote it down. Later that afternoon, they called the number. It didn't exist. What followed was not a dramatic arrest or a public confrontation. It was something colder. Records checks, database searches, quiet phone calls. One by one, pieces of Thomas Lippert's story began to loosen. The consultant, no license. The registration, never issued. The legal framework, misrepresented. And yet, every document looked legitimate. Which raised a far more troubling question. If this was a lie, it wasn't a sloppy one, it was built. As the investigation widened, the emotional stakes rose quickly. A newborn was involved. A surrogate felt trapped between trust and fear. And a man who claimed legal authority was suddenly surrounded by silence. Lippert continued to cooperate. Too much, some thought. He offered explanations before questions were finished. He framed inconsistencies as misunderstandings. He spoke of gray areas and interpretations, but law enforcement wasn't focused on what he said anymore. They were focused on how he said it. Calm, detached, unbothered. Not the behavior of someone caught off guard. The behavior of someone who believed he was still in control. By the end of the week, investigators uncovered the detail that changed everything. A timestamp. One critical document, central to the agreement, had been created after the surrogate had already committed to the process, which meant the foundation of the entire arrangement was built retroactively. In simple terms, the legality had been implied, not established. The agreement hadn't failed. It had never existed in the way everyone believed. As the file was updated and forwarded to legal counsel, one investigator summarized it quietly. This wasn't a mistake. It was a design, and for the first time since the baby was born, the room fell completely silent, because if the contract was a lie, imagine signing up to help a family, only to find yourself trapped in a legal and emotional nightmare. This is the story of a surrogacy that went horribly wrong, a tale of manipulation that unravels a much bigger problem. It all started with what seemed like a standard surrogacy agreement. A woman, let's call her Sarah, agreed to be a surrogate for a man named Thomas Lippert, but as the process unfolded, red flags started popping up everywhere. The terms of the agreement began to shift in subtle but significant ways. Promises made were suddenly forgotten, and legal documents seemed to have conveniently ambiguous wording. Sarah found herself under immense psychological pressure. Lippert, it turned out, was a master at exploiting legal loopholes. He knew the system inside and out, and he used that knowledge not to ensure a smooth process, but to bend it to his will. Every time Sarah raised a concern, she was met with a wall of legal jargon and veiled threats about the consequences of not cooperating. She felt isolated, powerless, and completely betrayed. What was supposed to be an act of kindness had turned into a battle for her own rights and well-being. As investigators started digging into the case, they discovered this wasn't just a simple dispute between two people. Lippert's actions were exposing critical vulnerabilities in the surrogacy system itself. The laws and regulations meant to protect everyone involved were full of gaps that a determined individual could easily exploit. The system that was supposed to provide a framework of trust was failing. Sarah was left in a precarious position, legally bound to an agreement that was being twisted against her, with her physical and emotional health on the line. The case seemed to be hitting a dead end. Lippert's lawyers were skilled at painting him as the victim, and Sarah as an unreliable and emotional surrogate. It was his word against hers, and he had the resources to make his word sound more convincing. The legal system seemed to be siding with the person who could manipulate it best. For Sarah and her supporters, it felt like they were shouting into the void, their pleas for justice unheard. It was a classic case of how power and money can warp the truth, leaving the actual victim to suffer in silence. Then came the breakthrough, from the most unexpected place, an old email thread buried deep in a server. These emails, exchanged long before the contracts were even signed, revealed Lippert's true intentions. In his own words, he discussed how he planned to reframe the agreement after the fact. He wasn't just confused or mistaken, he had a clear, calculated strategy from the very beginning. He intended to change the terms, to shift the goalposts, and to use the legal system as a weapon. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was deliberate, premeditated deception. This digital smoking gun changed everything, finally giving Sarah the proof she needed to fight back. Thanks for watching, and if you found this story important, please like and subscribe for more deep dives. Imagine this, a couple, overjoyed, dreaming of starting a family. They find a surrogate, someone they believe shares their values, someone they trust completely. This isn't just a business transaction for them. It's the creation of a family, a bond built on hope and good faith. But what happens when that trust is shattered? What happens when a signature on a contract becomes the first shot in a devastating legal war? This is the story of a surrogacy journey that went horribly wrong. It all started with a simple, yet fatal, assumption. The intended parents believed their lawyer, the one they hired and paid for, was representing everyone involved. The surrogate, the parents, all one happy team, right? Wrong. The surrogate had her own ideas, her own beliefs, and she never once spoke to the lawyer they thought was hers. She never verified a single detail, never confirmed her representation. She just assumed, and that assumption became a ticking time bomb. When the baby was born, the dream turned into a nightmare. The surrogate, feeling unrepresented and betrayed, decided she was the rightful mother. She refused to hand over the child. Suddenly, the hospital room became a courtroom, and the birth certificate, a weapon. The legal battle that followed was brutal, exposing a web of miscommunication and misplaced trust. The core of the case wasn't about biology. It was about representation. Who did the lawyer actually work for? In court, the truth came out, piece by painful piece. The lawyer testified he only ever represented the intended parents. The surrogate admitted she never spoke to him, never signed an engagement letter, never paid him a dime. Her belief that he was her lawyer was built on nothing but thin air. The judge had to untangle this mess. The law is clear. A lawyer represents the client who hires them. Without a contract, without communication, there is no representation. The surrogate's feelings, however strong, couldn't change that legal reality. The court ruled in favor of the intended parents. The baby was finally united with them, but the emotional scars on all sides were deep. This case is a powerful, heartbreaking lesson. In any legal agreement, especially one as personal and life-changing as surrogacy, you cannot assume anything. Verify everything. Ask the hard questions. Who does this lawyer work for? Do I have my own independent legal counsel? Trust is beautiful, but in the eyes of the law, verification is everything. Don't let your dream of a family turn into a courtroom drama. Protect yourself, protect your future, and never, ever just assume. This story serves as a critical reminder for anyone considering surrogacy or any complex legal agreement. It highlights the absolute necessity of clear communication and independent legal representation for all parties involved. A simple conversation, a single clarifying question, could have prevented this entire ordeal. Thanks for watching, and if you found this story insightful, please like and subscribe for more deep dives into the complexities of the law. Stay informed and stay safe.